future of mobility. I mean, we could fill an entire day with that, I guess. The future of mobility obviously involves a lot of different fields. And one field that everybody immediately thinks about is, of course, cars. I mean, especially in a country like Germany, where every 7th employee is basically somehow dependent on the car industry. So Alex, you're head of the BMW I division of BMW, and you're focusing on the next generation of cars.
We already do this pretty correct. And the interesting thing is, we started to think about, we called it the future of mobility already in 2007. So it's quite a while that the BMW group, that probably for the last 100 years was known for straight inline 6 cylinders, and really probably something what you still have in mind with BMW, to think about what is actually next for us. And probably the first thing we brought to the market was in 2013, or all, I would say, electric first BMW car. And the interesting thing is, at first people were looking at this car, and some people were even saying, is this still a BMW? Because it probably did look a little bit different, and it was an all-electric car. But then people drove the car, and it's right now the most successful premium electric car you can buy. And people were completely convinced, because driving electric doesn't mean that you probably take away sheer driving pleasure. It's still there. So basically, for me, electromobility is already, I call it the next normal. But I think the more...
Let me quickly jump in there, because when BMW, created the i3 and the i8, I got really excited because I thought, wow, this stuff looks really like the future of cars. It's not like a regurgitated, old car that now has an electric engine. But then I bought a Tesla Roadster in 2012, and for whatever reason, my 2012 Tesla Roadster still kind of outperforms anything that comes from BMW. So what happened in that time frame from 2012 to 2018, these 6 years, and still the i8 and the i3 is essentially, the flagship electric car that BMW produces?
Not quite correct like this, because we always say BMW I's are pinnacle. Yeah. So it's really something like our pioneer with which we try to do some things new. But of course, we take all this knowledge we gain with BMW i, and then we bring it into the BMW cars as well. So currently, we're offering plug-in hybrids as well, and they all, of course, gain from the knowledge that we learned from these BMW i pinnacles. Mm-hmm. But you're right, of course, we bring a lot of more cars in the future. So in 2025, and that's only a mere 7 years from now, there will be 25 electrified vehicles with the BMW logo on the hood. So that's why I'm saying electric is the new normal. But actually much more, I think this we are sitting together, much more important is what is happening as well. And I think the bigger change probably for the entire industry will be autonomous driving. Because then when the car really is doing something probably like taking away your driving, it gives so much more potential to future business models. And this is why I'm really excited about autonomous driving.
Now, this is a super interesting field, and part of that field is how do you actually get the car to understand its surroundings? And David, I mean, you basically started a company around exactly that premise and said, okay, we need more advanced sensors to actually understand our surroundings. So what does your company do?
Yeah. So I founded this company 5 years ago in actually Silicon Valley. And then we're making lasers.
So you're originally Chinese. You went to Silicon Valley to study, I assume?
I went to the US to study. I studied robotics for my PhD, and then I worked for a Silicon Valley company, and then I just started this company about 5 years ago, and we've been making laser sensors since. And then, of course, I moved my company from the Silicon Valley to China.
Okay, so let me quickly interrupt. So you're creating laser sensors.
Yeah, laser sensors.
So basically, they are the big things, the rotating things that are on top of the cars.
I can give you a summary of what laser sensors are about for self-driving cars. So what this is that if you think about any robots or self-driving cars, they're seeing the world a little differently than what we do. You would think that the cameras are the most popular choice, right? But the fact that cameras have a lot of limitations. They won't see things in 3-dimensional. You miss object by not knowing how far each object is away from you. And also cameras are actually passive sensors in the sense that you rely on ambient light to know your information. But in a lot of conditions, for example, if you're driving in darkness, or you're driving against the sun, or in a lot of those cases, your cameras will malfunction. Likelihood, very low, say 1%. But 1% for self-driving car is huge because you will likely run into a lot of accidents. So this is where we come in. We make laser sensors. They give you three-dimensional measurement of everything around you. Essentially, you're seeing the world with an added layer of information, and that is really crucial to.
So you're constantly creating a 3D model of the world, and it adds to the other sensors, like the cameras that your car has.
Definitely.
So you started that in Silicon Valley, and then you moved back to China. Why?
Because I'm Chinese. My parents want me to go back. No,
it's a good reason. We heard that reason a couple of
times.
That's
also
already.
Definitely true. I will not deny that. But we moved to China because we believe that this comes back to actually technology. So we have a great sensor. We know it will really help everybody, including hopefully BMW. But we also realize that for such a new product to prevail, you actually need to make them first very reliable. B, you need to make them very affordable. Right? Even for BMW i-Series, you probably don't have unlimited budget on sensors.
Unfortunately not.
Exactly. So we realize that for something to become popular and to really save people's life, you really need to figure out the business side to make sure they actually become affordable enough so that you wouldn't think twice when you think about like more advanced sensors, and which is very challenging. So then, being native Chinese myself, and our team decided that, hey, if we can actually take this advanced technology from the US, from California, and then if we can build stuff in China, we're really combining the strengths of the both worlds, which is essentially what we have been doing.
And you're delivering anywhere to the world anyway. I mean, for you, I mean.
Ironically, this is what I didn't quite expect when I first made this move, because we were thinking that, everybody thinks China is a big market, native Chinese, let's go back to China and make money from the Chinese people first, which was the original plan. Yeah. It turns out that the rest of the world also needs us. So for today, we actually ship more than 70% of products to the US and Europe, especially Germany, because this is where the real innovations are happening.
So we have cars, we have the sensors that go into the cars, but this panel is really about the future of mobility, and obviously mobility is more than just cars, and hopefully much more than just cars. So Mobike. So we all know these bicycles that have been flooding our cities. What the hell have you been doing here?
Flooding the cities with bikes. No, I think there are.
And it may actually be a good thing, right?
Well, this is an important question, and I think so. Obviously, bike sharing has been in the media a lot recently and has been turning up in a lot of German cities. Not just us, but a number of other players, and has become quite a crowded market in some areas. I think the term flooding is a popular one, but realistically, when you look at our business model, we have brought in a few hundred, and in some places a few thousand bikes, but really it's not that many. There are obviously some other players that are doing something different, but the main thing to consider is the role of bike within mobility. So I think the panel we have today is really interesting to see that there used to be these individual mobility choices. So either you're a person who uses public transport, you're a private cyclist, you have your private car, and what we're seeing increasingly is the development of networks. So instead of being someone who drives to work every day, maybe I'm someone who takes public transport and at the end of my trip takes a autonomous car, or a taxi, or a bike, or walks, and increasingly things like electric scooters are also appearing. So I think what we're doing is something interesting in that it's an old technology made new again, in the same way that what we're doing with self-driving cars is essentially taking a 100-year-old technology and reinventing it. And the bike sharing is going to be a part of the future of this mobility mix, and I think is also an important opportunity for Germany and for cities in Germany, particularly as we look towards the concerns around safety, public health, and pollution that are really important to answer within that mobility mix.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is nobody talks about that we've been flooding the cities with cars over the last 100 years, right? So
absolutely.
No, I think it's a really, really important point, and obviously the future of transportation is increasingly multimodal. So you're using multiple different devices, and that are hopefully readily available to do your transport needs. Now, there's an interesting question. So we've been pushing cars more or less out of the city in many places, and we're trying to get more cyclists in. But then we have this other development of self-driving cars that basically can drive around all of the time, unattended, and can take you from A to B. Is there like a clash that is happening at some point. You know, will I actually take the bicycle if I have a self-driving car readily available that I can jump in? What's your opinion on this, Alex?
I guess it's quite the opposite actually, because we are a customer-centric company, and I think we are all customers. And I'll give you an example. Today, when I choose to drive from Munich to here to Bayreuth, of course, thought about my mobility options. What kind of options do I have? I could have taken the train. I could have, of course, used the car. The bike, I would have probably had to start 2 days ago. Flight was out of the reason. But I think we as customers, we are used since Stone Age to travel from A to B. And basically, this is why it's called the future of mobility. It's not about the future of cars. It's how do we actually move from A to B in the future. And I think the broadening of our perspective needs to be that this whole journey needs to just make sense for us. And it needs to be in the most convenient and I would say comfortable way that we actually can use it as customers.
Yeah, but you know, at some point we probably have to also make a political decision. You know, do we actually, you know, build more bike lanes, or do we actually allow more self-driving cars in the city? I mean, it's probably something that at some point we have to decide, right?
You could do both actually. Why don't you probably just an example? It's my personal opinion, not my company's opinion. Why don't you probably do something like parking spaces outside of the inner cities? Mm-hmm. You can park your autonomous driving car there, and you'll probably use the rest of the way with bicycles, subway, public transport, I don't know what. So you could get probably some cleaner air within the cities. And then if you're outside, you can decide if you want to drive by yourself or if you want to probably use something like an autonomous driven vehicle. So I think it's all about that you give choices to the people. Yeah. Forcing people is never a good way. So people should want to actually make this change happen.
Absolutely.
And sorry, go ahead. Well, I think also what's really exciting about that is that autonomous cars aren't necessarily a competitor to cycling. I think they work really well together. I think when you see
definitely
the improvement that we already have seen from cars in the last 10 to 15 years have been immense in the terms of safety. And when you think of cycling safety, one of the biggest dangers is inattentive drivers with poor visibility. And so you see sensor technology, improved self-driving cars, improved safety technology working really well together to make a city that works not just for cyclists, but for pedestrians, for people in wheelchairs, for kids, things that people consider important for a healthy and human city, they all work together to make that mobility mix work for everyone.
Yeah. But there are some people who argue that if you have self-driving cars, then our roads will be completely full with self-driving cars, you know, carrying around goods and children and disabled people, and you know, there's so much more traffic. I mean, David?
I actually think differently. So the way I look at it is that a lot of people, there's a huge debate between, say, robots taking over the world versus, like, do we get to keep our jobs, things like this, right? I always look at it and laugh about it because I think this is assumption of people always assume this is zero-sum game. If I lose, you gain, I lose, you lose, I gain, right? I don't see that. I see as we're developing different technologies, it's a non-zero-sum game in the sense that it could be that we're both making progress, both technologies become mature enough, and as you said, in the end, people end up having multiple, much better options at the same time. For example, one of the analogy I look at is that, for example, in the past, people read newspapers and watch televisions, right? And then now you have like streaming services like YouTube and Netflix, which serves very different purposes for each of the category, right? But people still watch TVs for other reasons. For example, if you watch soccer, oh, maybe it's a bad topic, sorry. Maybe, let's say you watch basketball. And then, and then you would want to turn on TV and see things live, right? If you stream, it wouldn't be as good. But then on the other hand, if you want to watch a movie, you still probably go to Netflix or things like that. Sure. If you want to watch like a small episode, you go to YouTube for other interesting content. So in the end, each of the technology advances themselves to a level where it starts to make the most sense. But it's not necessarily taking the traffic from others because it wouldn't be a good application for you to watch YouTube stuff on your TV anyways because you wouldn't like the content. So in same analogy for transportation in the sense that you would realize that for some of those applications, riding a bike is perfect. And then people would do that for that specific purposes.
Yeah, and actually a lot of people like riding bikes. It's fun, you know.
I think in the end,
usually not fun, but sitting in a car.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I think in the end, everything will coexist, and then everything will also become so much more efficient. It will be actually maybe fewer cars, but much more utilized cars, and there wouldn't be so much space wasted on parking lots. with cars sitting there, nothing to do.
Absolutely.
And then the street actually be less crowded because you might be able to carpool people to move them around.
Yeah, and you
and
can give it back maybe to nature or whatever. You know,
yeah, then
parks.
you leave the room back to the bikes. So
Absolutely.
I think everybody wins in the end.
So I have two very specific questions to Alex from BMW, and it's the same question you usually get when you talk about electric mobility. So why are alternatives like hydrogen cells not being considered for e-mobility? I mean, I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it.
Very good question, and I can say we are of course looking into all options that are about future mobility. If you look currently at what we're getting out of battery technology and how I would say the advances in the infrastructure are going on, we as a company, and I think we are not alone, really consider that for the current period of time, electromobility is actually the best way to go. So hydrogen is something we still do research on, and probably, don't cite me on the time period, 2030, whatever, things could be a period of time where you go into hydrogen or fuel cell as well. But if you just consider how long it now actually is taking to build up something like a battery refuel network all over Europe or the world, you can see how much time and money it actually takes. And if you now consider hydrogen again as something like an entirely new technology, where you actually have to do two things. You need to produce the hydrogen in a really high, I would say, density and capacity. And the second thing, somebody needs to invest in making this infrastructure happening as well. So we as car manufacturers, we had, it was called Active Hydrogen 7, I think it was 20 or 15 years ago. We had already a car on the street. For us, it wouldn't be too much of a problem to mass produce something like hydrogen cars. But actually, if you as customers don't have a choice to refuel them, and nobody actually is investing currently in hydrogen infrastructure, I think battery is actually the best way to go for the moment.
Yeah, and you know, what people always forget is, you know, hydrogen, you have to generate hydrogen somehow, and it has a terrible energy efficiency. I mean, you
at the moment it has. If you don't use solar energy to create hydrogen, actually your energy balance is much, much worse.
Yeah, you get almost all of the energy out of the battery. You get, you know, about 40% out of the hydrogen. The other question is, why don't you build a battery factory? I mean, you're totally dependent on basically, you know, Asian suppliers for batteries, and that's actually a big concern in electric mobility for me as well.
Very good question. Actually, we're doing cooperations with a lot of battery, I would say, producers. You always need to separate, and it's not technical now, the battery, the cells, and probably then the entire structure that you put in the car. And that's two separate things. The one is the commodity you can probably buy at a manufacturer, and that is what we are actually doing, like everybody else is doing at the big, I would say, companies that produce those batteries. And as I said, we consider them more or less like a commodity, because there are other companies who are really, really good in producing these commodity batteries, but where really actually then, I would say, the innovation and the secret sauce of every manufacturer is coming in, coupling these batteries together and having a good electronic device to really steer those batteries. And this is where actually, I would say, every company I know currently is going in different directions. So we basically might use the same ingredients, and these ingredients can be bought in an open market for, I would say, even cheaper prices as we speak. But the bringing them together, of course, is something like a core competency that we then keep within our company.
And we also know that Germany is actually one of the leading research. I mean, in Germany, one of the leading research fields is new battery technologies. We all know that the current battery technology is one thing, but you know, there will be much more interesting battery technologies. And I hope you will adopt them very quickly. Talking about sensors, you know, right now LiDAR sensors are like these big rotating things that look like big old police lights that you had, you know, in the 60s. You know, will they ever get smaller?
Wow. The politically correct answer is definitely. Most people like to hear that because we're also making, this is called spinning things, like bulky, ugly. In the US, people call that the KFC bucket. So, and then we're making them much smaller. And not only us, a lot of those companies in this industry are trying to miniaturize things. That's for sure happening, and trying to make things cheaper. That's for sure. But we also see the other trend that minimizing cost is one thing. The other thing is increase the reliability and performance of sensors, which sometimes make them bigger. But we also see this trend going on in our industry in the sense that more and more customers realize that they actually need better high-fidelity sensors. And then for example, you must have heard the word robotaxi. For robo-taxis, people are actually okay with big, ugly, but high-performance sensors. If you look at like companies like Waymo, they have not so great-looking sensors on the top, but it does the job. So we see this separation of one beautiful, small, affordable sensors for production cars like maybe an I-Series. And then we also see the other trend of a little more expensive, ugly, but super performance LiDAR sensors for robo-taxis, which you will never have to buy. You just have to pay for the service. Like
yeah, you don't really care. I mean, this is one interesting challenge for the car companies anyway. If you have self-driving cars and robo-taxis everywhere, do I actually care what type of car it is? I mean, I don't know what type of bus just took me to the train station.
Some companies prefer their robo-taxis look different.
Yeah, so you can make them pink or something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Exactly.
So what is one of the most exciting things that you see in the field of mobility in general? I mean, bicycles are one thing, but there are other things like flying cars and whatnot, right? I mean, everybody's laughing, but there are actually companies that do that, and they are not very far away from market introduction. So this is all going to come in the next couple of years, and it will actually for a region like here, I think it could be transformative. If it takes you 45 minutes to come here from Munich, point to point, that's actually a game changer. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I mean, what's one of the most exciting things you see in electric mobility, in the future of mobility?
Well, electric is one, self-driving is another. I think the augmented personal transportation, so the ability to, say, do e-bikes, which means that you can do things like go from 1 to 5 kilometers to 0 to 30 kilometers is something about local. But as you said, the three-dimensional part of transit, where people are looking at a mobility mix that would allow them to go quite large distances, but point to point, as opposed to having to constantly reroute around. I'm not so sure of this timeline for personal flying cars, but I see that the timelines are getting shorter from the ever-present 20 years. I think, obviously, our focus is urban mobility, and there we're seeing a lot of interest in the alternative methods that allow for things like e-bikes, e-scooters are now becoming increasingly popular. The way in which those meld and interact then with a public transport system, with self-driving cars and with car sharing, so that instead of having single channels of transportation, you now have a properly functioning network, which means that cities can also change the way in which they're built, and they grow and they change. And we see this in European cities. Population changes are happening at 10% a year, and the infrastructure is failing to catch up. And I think that's where we'll see a rethink of what a mobility network involves, including all the technologies that we're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, really exciting time for mobility. We have lots of problems with transportation everywhere, in every metropolis. Either it's that it's very congested, or that the distances are very far. So I think in the next couple of years we're going to see a lot of stuff. Well, we could talk about this all day long. I think we covered quite some ground. Thank you so much for your participation in this panel.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. And yeah, it's going to be exciting.